The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered depot, and Olivia Walsh pressed her gloved hand against her throat, feeling the rapid pulse beneath her fingers as dust swirled through the open window and coated everything in a fine layer of grit. Fort Sumner, New Mexico, stretched before her in the harsh afternoon sun of 1878, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that seemed to shimmer in the heat like a mirage she could not escape. She had traveled over 1,000 miles from Philadelphia to become the bride of a rancher named Gerald Mitchum, a man whose letters had promised security and comfort, but whose penmanship had grown increasingly demanding with each correspondence. The other passengers departed first, their boots hitting the packed earth with confident thuds, but Olivia remained seated, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her dark traveling dress, as memories she desperately tried to bury clawed their way to the surface. 3 years ago, she had possessed a voice that carried across rooms, a laugh that drew people near, opinions she shared freely at dinner parties and family gatherings. Then she had met Marcus, a banker's son with charm that masked cruelty, and within 6 months of their courtship, she had learned that speaking her mind resulted in consequences. The first time he had struck her for contradicting him in front of his friends, she had been so shocked she could not find words to protest. The second time, she had tried to leave, and he had found her at the train station, dragging her back with promises that sliced like knives hidden in velvet. By the time her family discovered the bruises, Marcus had already spread rumors about her mental instability, her tendency toward hysteria, her unfitness as a wife. When he died in a riding accident, thrown from his horse during a hunt, Olivia felt nothing but relief, followed immediately by shame for that relief. But the damage had been done. Philadelphia society whispered about her, and suitors avoided her as though her misfortune might be contagious. Her father's business failed shortly after, and her mother's illness drained what little remained of their savings. The mail-order bride advertisement had seemed like an escape, a chance to disappear into the vast western territories where no one knew her history. Now, sitting in the stifling coach, she wondered if she had simply traded one prison for another. "Miss Walsh?" A voice cut through her spiraling thoughts, and she looked up to see the stagecoach driver peering in at her with concern etched across his sun-weathered face. "Your intended is waiting over at the hotel. I can help you with your trunk." Olivia nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and stepped down onto the street. The heat hit her immediately, so different from the humid summers of Pennsylvania. Fort Sumner bustled with activity, despite the afternoon hour. Cowboys drove cattle through the main thoroughfare, raising more dust. Women in simple cotton dresses hurried along wooden sidewalks with baskets over their arms. Somewhere, a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil in steady rhythm. The driver hauled her single trunk onto his shoulder and gestured toward a 2-story building with a painted sign declaring it the Sumner House Hotel. Gerald Mitchum stood on the hotel's front porch, and Olivia's stomach tightened at the sight of him. He was older than his letters had suggested, perhaps 45 to her 24 years, with a thick build running to fat and eyes that assessed her with the same cold calculation she had seen Marcus employ when evaluating livestock or furniture. He did not smile as she approached, merely nodded once and dismissed the driver with a coin. "You are late," Gerald said, his voice flat. "The stage was supposed to arrive this morning." Olivia opened her mouth to explain about the broken wheel that had delayed them outside of Santa Fe, but the words stuck in her throat like stones. Her heart hammered, and suddenly she was back in Marcus's parlor, trying to justify why dinner had been delayed, watching his face darken with each word she spoke. She closed her mouth and lowered her eyes instead. "I see." Gerald's tone suggested he saw more than she wished. "The Reverend Parker is waiting at the church. We will marry immediately, and then I will take you to the ranch. It is 15 miles north, and I want to be back before dark." He paused, studying her continued silence. "Do you understand English, girl?" "My letters indicated you were educated." She forced herself to nod, the motion jerky and unnatural. Gerald grunted and gestured for her to follow him. As she walked behind him down the dusty street, toward a small white church with a cross mounted above its door. Olivia felt the last fragile threads of hope she had carried from Philadelphia begin to fray. This man would not be kind. This marriage would not be the fresh start she had desperately needed. But what choice did she have? She possessed no money for return passage, no family able to take her back, no prospects beyond becoming Gerald Mitchum's wife. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. Reverend Parker, a thin man with kind eyes that seemed to see too much, asked if she took Gerald as her lawful wedded husband. Olivia managed a whispered "I do" that barely carried past her lips. Gerald's response boomed through the small church, confident and possessive. When the Reverend pronounced them married, Gerald gripped her arm with enough force to leave marks and led her back outside to where a wagon waited with her trunk already loaded in the back. They drove north in silence, the wagon wheels creaking and the sun beating down mercilessly. Olivia kept her eyes on the landscape, watching sagebrush and scattered junipers pass by, mountains rising in the purple distance. Gerald made no attempt at conversation, which suited her fine. She could feel the tension radiating from him, a barely contained irritation that reminded her so much of Marcus. She had to fight not to jump from the moving wagon and run. The Mitchum Ranch appeared as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, a sprawling collection of buildings centered around a main house built of rough-hewn logs and adobe. Corrals held horses and cattle, and several outbuildings suggested a prosperous operation. Yet something about the place felt wrong to Olivia, a wrongness she could not name but felt deep in her bones. Gerald pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down without offering to help her. "Unload your trunk and bring it inside. I need to check on the stock before dark. There is bread and cheese in the kitchen. Do not touch anything else." He walked away before she could respond, his broad back radiating displeasure. Olivia struggled with her trunk, finally managing to drag it across the wagon bed and lower it to the ground with a thud that sent up a small cloud of dust. The trunk was too heavy for her to lift, so she dragged it slowly toward the house, her arms aching with the effort. She had just reached the porch steps when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A rider came into the yard at an easy lope, and Olivia looked up to see a man astride a paint horse that seemed to dance rather than merely walk. The rider pulled up when he spotted her struggling with the trunk, and he swung down from the saddle with a fluid grace that marked him as someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. He was younger than Gerald by at least 20 years, perhaps 28 or 30, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat and eyes the color of smoke shot through with silver. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and boots that had seen considerable use. A pistol hung at his hip, but it was the calm, watchful intelligence in his face that caught Olivia's attention. "Let me help you with that, madam," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that Gerald's had lacked. He lifted the trunk as though it weighed nothing and carried it up onto the porch. "I am Nathan Cordell, the foreman here. You must be Mr. Mitchum's new bride. Welcome to the Diamond M." Olivia stared at him, words tangling in her mind. She wanted to thank him, to introduce herself properly, but her voice would not cooperate. The kindness in his eyes made something inside her chest ache, and she was terrified that if she spoke, she might start crying and never stop. So she nodded instead, a quick, jerky motion, and turned away to open the front door. Nathan's expression shifted to concern, but he did not press her. He simply carried the trunk inside and set it down in the front room, which was sparsely furnished with a sagging couch, a scarred table, and little else. "The ranch keeps us all busy this time of year," he said conversationally, as though her silence was perfectly natural. "Roundup starts in a few weeks. We have got about 20 hands working the place, most of them good men. If you need anything, the bunkhouse is that long building to the east. I am usually there or out on the range." He paused at the door, something unreadable crossing his face. "It is good to have a woman's presence here again. The place has been pretty lonely since Mr. Mitchum's first wife passed." The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Olivia stood alone in the dim interior of her new home. Gerald had not mentioned a first wife in his letters. She wondered how the woman had died, then decided she did not want to know. Moving mechanically, she explored the house. The kitchen was functional but dirty, dishes piled in a tin basin and grease coating the stove. Two bedrooms opened off a short hallway, one clearly Gerald's from the rumpled bed and discarded clothing, the other empty except for a narrow cot and a wooden chest. She assumed that would be hers and felt a rush of relief that Gerald apparently did not intend to immediately claim his marital rights. She found the bread and cheese he had mentioned and forced herself to eat, though the food tasted like sawdust in her mouth. As darkness fell, she lit a lamp and waited, every nerve tense for Gerald to return. When he finally came in, smelling of horses and sweat, he barely glanced at her. "I will be up early. Have breakfast ready by 5. Biscuits, bacon, and coffee. The supplies are in the pantry." He moved toward his bedroom, then paused. "I assume you know how to cook?" Olivia nodded, though her experience with cooking was limited to helping the family cook in Philadelphia during their final impoverished year. Gerald grunted and disappeared into his room, closing the door firmly behind him. Olivia released a breath she had not realized she was holding and retreated to the small bedroom that would be hers. She lay on the cot fully clothed, staring at the dark ceiling, and did not sleep. The days that followed fell into a grueling pattern. Olivia rose before dawn to prepare Gerald's breakfast, working in the dim kitchen with her exhausted mind struggling to remember recipes she had only half learned. The first morning, she burned the bacon and made the coffee too weak, and Gerald backhanded her across the face with enough force to split her lip. She had expected it, had braced for it, but the casual violence still made her hands shake so badly she could barely clean up the breakfast dishes after he left. Nathan arrived later that morning to discuss ranch business with Gerald, and his eyes went immediately to the bruise blooming on her cheek. He said nothing, but she saw his jaw tighten and his hands curl into fists at his sides. Gerald noticed too and seemed pleased by the reaction, a small mean smile playing around his mouth as he deliberately put his hand on Olivia's shoulder in a gesture that looked affectionate but involved his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "My wife is still learning," Gerald said. "She will do better tomorrow." Nathan's smoke-gray eyes met Olivia's for just a moment, and she saw something there that made her heart skip. Recognition. He knew exactly what kind of man Gerald was, and he was angry about it. But what could he do? Gerald was his employer, and she was Gerald's legal wife. The law would not protect her, would not even care. She was property now, no different than the cattle in the corrals or the horses in the barn. As the weeks passed, Olivia learned to move through the house like a ghost, making no sound, drawing no attention to herself. She cooked and cleaned and tried to anticipate Gerald's needs before he could find fault with her. Sometimes she succeeded, and he ignored her completely, which was the best she could hope for. Other times, she failed in ways she could not predict, and he reminded her of her failures with his fists or his belt or simply his words, which could cut just as deeply. The only bright spots in her existence came from Nathan. He seemed to find reasons to come to the main house more often than strictly necessary, always bringing some question about the cattle or the range or supplies that needed ordering. He never mentioned her bruises or the way she flinched at sudden movements, but his presence brought a strange sort of comfort. He spoke to her with consistent courtesy, his voice always gentle, and he had a way of filling silences that did not require her to respond. He told her about the ranch, the land, the weather patterns, the wildlife he encountered. His words painted pictures that helped her escape, at least mentally, from the prison of her circumstances. One afternoon in early October, about 6 weeks after her arrival, Nathan found her behind the house attempting to start a vegetable garden in a small plot of land. Her hands were raw from digging in the hard earth with a rusted trowel, and tears of frustration streaked her dusty face. She had not heard him approach, and when he spoke her name, she jumped so violently she dropped the trowel and pressed herself against the side of the house, her arms coming up defensively. "I am sorry," Nathan said immediately, stopping several feet away and keeping his hands visible. "I did not mean to startle you. I should have made more noise." He waited, not moving closer, until her breathing slowed and she lowered her arms. That is pretty ambitious work in this soil. Let me get a proper spade from the barn. We can break up the ground better. He disappeared before she could protest and returned with a sturdy spade and a pickaxe. For the next hour, he worked on the garden plot while she watched, turning the hard, packed earth into something workable. His shirt grew dark with sweat despite the cooling autumn air, and Olivia found herself noticing the strength in his shoulders, the easy competence with which he moved. He was nothing like Gerald, nothing like Marcus. There was a steadiness to Nathan, a quiet confidence that did not need to prove itself through domination. There, he said finally, leaning on the spade and surveying the turned earth with satisfaction. That should do you, although you will want to plant pretty quick. First frost usually comes by late October. He glanced at her, and his expression softened. My mother kept a garden back in Kansas. She always said working in the dirt helped clear her mind. I hope it does the same for you. Olivia wanted to thank him, wanted to tell him that his kindness meant more than he could possibly know, but the words remained locked inside her. Instead, she picked up the packet of vegetable seeds she had purchased with the small allowance Gerald grudgingly gave her for household supplies and held them up so Nathan could see. His face broke into a genuine smile that transformed him, erasing the serious lines around his mouth and making his eyes crinkle at the corners. Good choice, he said. Lettuce and radishes will come up quick before the frost. Save the rest for spring. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something, then added quietly, If you ever need anything, Olivia, anything at all, you can come find me. I mean that. She nodded and for just a moment allowed herself to meet his eyes fully. What she saw there took her breath away. Nathan looked at her the way no one had in years, as though she mattered, as though she was more than an object to be used or discarded. The connection between them felt like a physical thing, a thread pulled taut, and she had to look away before the intensity of it overwhelmed her. That night, Gerald came home drunk from the saloon in town. He was in a rage about cattle prices and a deal that had fallen through, and he took his anger out on Olivia with a brutality that left her curled on the floor of the kitchen, her ribs screaming with each breath. When he finally stumbled off to bed, she dragged herself to her room and huddled on the cot, shaking uncontrollably. She could not do this. She could not survive this. But she had nowhere to go. No resources, no voice to cry for help, even if help had been available. The next morning, she could barely move. Every muscle protested, and her left eye had swollen nearly shut. Gerald took one look at her, grunted with satisfaction, and told her he was riding out to check the north pasture and would be gone all day. The moment he left, Olivia allowed herself to break down, silent sobs racking her battered body. She did not hear the door open or realize she was no longer alone until Nathan's voice, tight with fury, cut through her misery. Jesus Christ! She looked up to find him standing in the kitchen doorway, his face pale beneath his tan and his eyes blazing with an anger that paradoxically did not frighten her because she knew instinctively it was not directed at her. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering as though he wanted to help but feared hurting her further. Let me see, he said, his voice rough. Please, Olivia. Let me see how bad it is. She could not refuse him. Slowly, painfully, she let him examine her injuries, his touch so gentle it brought fresh tears to her eyes. He cursed steadily under his breath, a litany of words she suspected he would normally never say in front of a woman. When he reached for her ribs and she gasped in pain, his jaw clenched so hard she thought he might break his teeth. You need a doctor, he said flatly. I am taking you into town. She shook her head frantically and tried to push away from him, panic rising in her throat. If Gerald found out she had left the ranch with Nathan, he would kill her. She was certain of it. She opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out except a small, wounded sound that made Nathan's expression crumble. All right, he said, clearly struggling to control himself. All right, I will bring the doctor here. But Olivia, you cannot stay with him. This will not get better. He will kill you eventually. He waited, searching her face. Do you understand what I am saying? Gerald Mitchum is going to kill you if you stay. She knew. Of course she knew. But understanding her danger and being able to escape it were two entirely different things. She pulled back from Nathan and wrapped her arms around herself, the universal gesture of someone with nowhere to run. Nathan sat back on his heels, clearly at war with himself. Finally, he said, I am going to get Doc Harrison. While I am gone, I want you to think about something. There are people who can help you. The law might not care what happens between a man and his wife, but that does not mean you have no options. There are places you could go, people who would take you in. He stood, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart clench. You do not have to live like this, and you should not have to live like this. He left, and Olivia remained on the floor, his words echoing in her mind. Did she dare believe him? Did she dare hope there might be another way? Doc Harrison arrived 2 hours later, a gruff older man who had clearly been briefed by Nathan on the ride out. He examined her with professional detachment, bound her ribs, and left her with packets of willow bark powder for the pain. He also left her with words that cut through the fog of her despair. I have been a doctor for 37 years, he said, as he packed up his bag. I have seen this too many times. The women who stay thinking it will get better, they are dead eventually. The ones who find the courage to leave, they survive. That is just a fact, no different than knowing infection kills or blood loss leads to death. You choose which kind of woman you want to be. After he left, Olivia lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling. The willow bark dulled the pain in her body, but did nothing for the pain in her soul. She thought about Nathan's kindness, about the way he looked at her as though she was precious. She thought about Gerald's fists and the dead look in his eyes when he hurt her. She thought about Philadelphia and Marcus and how she had run from that situation only to find herself in something worse. Somewhere in the depths of her being, something stirred. Not hope exactly. Hope felt too fragile, too dangerous, but maybe defiance. Maybe the first flickering ember of anger. She had been silent for so long, her voice stolen first by Marcus's violence and then by her own fear. But silence had not protected her. Compliance had not saved her. Perhaps it was time to try something different. The thought terrified her, but it also made her feel more alive than she had in 3 years. Gerald returned at dusk, and Olivia was up and moving, though every step cost her. She had prepared his dinner, and she served it without meeting his eyes. He ate in silence, barely acknowledging her presence. When he finished, he stood and moved toward her, and she forced herself not to flinch away. He grabbed her chin, tilting her face up so he could examine the bruises he had left. You look like hell, he said conversationally. Do not go into town until that heals. I do not want people talking. He released her and headed for his bedroom, calling back over his shoulder, breakfast at 5 as usual. Olivia stood frozen in the kitchen, her heart pounding. He had given her an order, the same as always, and expected her to obey. The same as always. But something inside her had shifted, and she knew with absolute certainty that she could not do this anymore. She would not do this anymore. That night, after Gerald's snores echoed through the house, Olivia slipped out the back door and walked through the darkness toward the bunkhouse. She had never done anything like this before, had never defied Gerald's unspoken rule that she was to remain in the main house unless explicitly permitted to leave. Her hands shook and her breathing came in short, painful gasps, but she kept walking. The bunkhouse glowed with lamplight, and she could hear the low murmur of voices inside. She hesitated at the door, her courage faltering. What was she doing? What did she think would happen? But before she could retreat, the door opened and Nathan stood there, silhouetted against the light. He took one look at her standing in the darkness and immediately stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind him. "Olivia?" His voice was gentle but concerned. "What are you doing out here? If Gerald wakes up and finds you gone—" She opened her mouth, and for the first time in 3 years, she found her voice. It came out rusty and rough, barely more than a whisper, but it was there. "Help me." The two words hung in the air between them. Nathan went very still, and even in the dim light spilling from the bunkhouse windows, she could see the emotion that crossed his face. Relief, determination, and something else, something warmer and deeper that made her breath catch. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, I will help you. Whatever you need." They stood there in the darkness, the enormity of her request and his acceptance settling over them like a shared cloak. Olivia felt tears spill down her cheeks, and she did not try to stop them. Nathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and when she did not, he pulled her very carefully into his arms, mindful of her injuries. "You are safe," he murmured into her hair. "I swear to you I will keep you safe." For the first time since arriving in New Mexico, Olivia believed someone might actually be able to keep that promise. She let herself lean into Nathan's warmth for just a moment, drawing strength from his steadiness, and then she pulled back. They needed a plan. Speaking those two words had taken everything she had, but it was a start. It was enough. Over the next week, Nathan carefully laid the groundwork for Olivia's escape. He could not simply help her leave immediately without risking both their lives. Gerald was known to have a vicious temper, and he would not take kindly to losing his property, which is how he viewed his wife. Nathan needed to be careful, needed to create a situation where Olivia could disappear in a way that would not immediately point back to him or put her in danger. During that week, Olivia discovered that finding her voice again was not a single moment, but a process. Each day she spoke a little more, first to Nathan in whispered conversations when he could slip away to meet her, and then gradually to herself, practicing forming words again. Her voice was rusty from disuse, and she stumbled over sentences, but Nathan's patient encouragement helped. He never pressured her, never demanded more than she could give, and his acceptance allowed her to slowly uncoil from the tight defensive ball she had wound herself into. They discovered during those stolen conversations that they shared more than just the immediate crisis. Nathan told her about growing up in Kansas, the youngest son of a farming family who had headed west after the war, looking for something bigger than tilling the same fields his father and grandfather had worked. He had drifted through various cattle outfits before landing at the Diamond Inn 3 years ago, and he spoke of the land with a passion that made his whole face come alive. He dreamed of having his own small ranch someday, nothing as large as Gerald's operation, but enough to run a modest herd and live independently. Olivia, in her halting, newly recovered voice, told him about Philadelphia, about her family's downfall and her mother's illness. She could not yet speak about Marcus or the full extent of what had been done to her, but Nathan seemed to understand without needing the details. He listened with complete attention, never interrupting, never judging, and when she fell silent, he filled the space with observations about the stars overhead or the way the cottonwoods along the creek were turning gold with autumn. Gerald noticed nothing. He was preoccupied with ranch business and spent most of his time either out on the range or in town at the saloon. When he was home, Olivia had learned to become invisible, to anticipate his needs and avoid giving him any excuse for violence. She still bore the fading bruises from his last attack, and she moved carefully, protecting her healing ribs. Nathan's plan finally came together in mid-October. There was a widow named Sarah Bennett who lived on a small homestead about 30 miles south of Fort Sumner. She was known for taking in women who needed help, providing them with shelter and work until they could get back on their feet. Nathan had ridden down to speak with her, explaining Olivia's situation, and Sarah had immediately agreed to take her in. The challenge was getting Olivia there without Gerald realizing what had happened until she was safely away. The opportunity came when Gerald announced he would be driving a small herd of cattle to Las Vegas, New Mexico to sell. The trip would take him 5 days, there and back. It was the opening they needed. Nathan laid out the plan carefully. On the morning Gerald left, Nathan would tell the other ranch hands he was riding out to check the line shacks on the far western boundary of the property, a task that would take several days. Instead, he would circle back to the main house, collect Olivia, and escort her to Sarah Bennett's homestead. By the time Gerald returned and discovered his wife missing, she would be well hidden, and Nathan would be back at the ranch with an airtight alibi. It is not perfect, Nathan admitted as they finalized the details in a whispered conversation behind the barn. Gerald will know someone helped you, and he might suspect me, but he will not be able to prove anything, and more importantly, you will be away from here. What about you? Olivia asked, her voice still soft but growing stronger each day. If he even suspects you were involved, he could hurt you. He could kill you. Nathan's gray eyes met hers steadily. I am willing to take that risk. Why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. Why would you risk so much for me? You barely know me. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. I know enough. I know you deserve better than what he has given you. I know you have courage, even if you do not see it yet. And I know that watching what he does to you and doing nothing would make me the worst kind of coward. He paused and something flickered in his expression. And maybe I am not being entirely selfless. Maybe I am helping you because the thought of you staying here, of him destroying what is left of your spirit, is unbearable to me. The air between them felt charged, electric. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs, and for the first time in years, the sensation was not fear, but something else entirely. Hope, yes, but also a tentative joy, a recognition that this man saw her not as property or a burden, but as someone worthy of effort and risk. When this is over, Nathan continued, his voice rough, when you are safe and have had time to heal, I would like to court you properly, if you would allow it. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of pain or fear. I would like that, she whispered. Very much. Nathan's face broke into that transformative smile she had only seen a few times before, and he reached out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was achingly tender, and Olivia had to fight the urge to lean into his touch. There would be time for that later, she told herself. First, she had to escape. First, she had to survive. Gerald left on a Wednesday morning, driving 20 head of cattle with 2 of the ranch hands to help him. He barely spoke to Olivia before departing, just grunted instructions about keeping the house in order and reminded her not to go into town. The moment the cattle and riders disappeared over the eastern ridge, Olivia felt as though she could breathe fully for the first time in weeks. Nathan waited until mid-morning to make his move. He announced loudly to the remaining hands that he was heading out to inspect the line shacks and would be back in 3 or 4 days. Then he saddled his paint horse and a gentle mare named Bess, loaded supplies into saddlebags, and rode casually out of the yard, heading west. 2 hours later, he circled back through a dry wash that kept him out of sight of the ranch buildings and approached the main house from the rear. Olivia was ready. She had packed her few belongings into a small carpet bag and changed into her most practical dress. When Nathan tapped softly on the back door, she had it open before his knuckles finished the second knock. Seeing him there, solid and real, and offering her a way out made her want to collapse with relief. But there was no time for that. They needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the Diamond M before anyone noticed something was wrong. Nathan helped her into the saddle of the mare, checked that her bag was securely tied, and swung onto his own horse. We will ride hard for the first few hours, he said, then ease up once we are well clear. You let me know if you need to stop and rest. Your rib's still healing, so do not try to be tough about it. Olivia nodded and gathered the reins. She had not ridden in years, but her body remembered the basics. They set off at a steady lope, heading south through terrain that grew increasingly rugged. The October sun beat down despite the cooling season, and dust rose from the horses' hooves. Olivia focused on staying in the saddle and keeping pace with Nathan, who frequently glanced back to check on her. They rode through the afternoon, stopping only once to water the horses at a small spring Nathan knew about. Olivia's ribs ached fiercely, but she gritted her teeth and said nothing. This pain was nothing compared to what she would suffer if Gerald found her. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nathan finally called a halt in a small canyon where a few scraggly cottonwoods provided some shelter. "We will camp here tonight," he said, helping Olivia down from the saddle. She had stiffened up during the long ride, and her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. Nathan caught her with steady hands. "Easy. Let me get a fire going and some food in you. You will feel better after you eat and rest." He was right. The simple meal of beans and hardtack accompanied by strong coffee revived her considerably. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast New Mexico sky, Olivia sat near the small fire and watched Nathan move around the camp with easy efficiency. He checked on the horses, arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, and then settled across from her with his own cup of coffee. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Olivia said, and was pleased that her voice came out stronger than it had even that morning. "Thank you, Nathan, for all of this. You do not need to thank me." He stared into the fire, his face thoughtful. "I have been working for Gerald for 3 years, and I knew he was not a good man. Hard, mean, quick with his fists when he dealt with the hands. But I did not know the full extent of it until you arrived." He looked up at her. "I should have done something sooner. The first time I saw bruises on you, I should have acted." "What could you have done?" Olivia asked gently. "The law would not have helped me. Everyone would have said it was Gerald's right to discipline his wife however he saw fit." "That does not make it right." Nathan's voice was fierce. "Just because something is illegal does not make it just. You are a person, Olivia, not property. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness." His words settled into her chest like warm stones, anchoring her. "I forgot that," she admitted quietly. "For a long time, I forgot that I was anything other than what people told me I was. Difficult, hysterical, unworthy." She paused, struggling with the words. Before Gerald, there was someone else. Marcus. He was the one who first made me afraid to speak. Nathan remained quiet, letting her find her way through the story at her own pace. Haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency, Olivia told him about Marcus. About the courtship that had seemed romantic until it became controlling. About the first time Marcus hit her and how shocked she had been. About the escalating violence and the way Marcus isolated her from friends and family. About his death and the strange guilty relief she had felt. About Philadelphia society's whispers and her family's collapse and how the mail order bride advertisement had seemed like salvation. "Instead, I found Gerald," she finished, her voice dropping. "Someone even worse in some ways, because at least Marcus pretended to love me. Gerald does not even pretend. I am just a housekeeper he does not have to pay." "That is done now," Nathan said firmly. "You are free of him. In a few days you will be safely at Sarah Bennett's place, and Gerald Mitchum will never touch you again." "What if he comes looking for me? What if he finds me?" "He will not. Sarah is smart and tough, and she has helped women disappear before. The law might not care about domestic violence, but it also will not put much effort into finding a runaway wife. Gerald will bluster and rage, but eventually he will give up and either find another mail order bride or just hire a housekeeper." Nathan leaned forward, his eyes catching the firelight. "You are going to be all right, Olivia. I promise you." She wanted to believe him. Sitting there under the vast, star-strewn sky, with the fire crackling between them and the horses quietly grazing nearby, it was almost possible to believe that she might actually have a future beyond fear and pain. Almost possible to believe that the gentle man across from her could be part of that future. Tell me about your dream, she said, wanting to hear something hopeful. Your own ranch. What would it look like? Nathan's face lit up. Nothing fancy, he said. A few hundred acres, maybe, in good grass country with a reliable water source. A small herd, 100 head or so. Enough to make a living, but not so much I would need to hire a dozen hands. A house, nothing big, but solid and well built. He paused, his expression turning almost shy. A garden, maybe, for vegetables. And a barn for the horses. I have always loved working with horses more than cattle. I think I would like to focus on breeding good ranch horses, the kind that are smart and steady and can work all day without complaint. That sounds wonderful, Olivia said softly. She could picture it, the small ranch Nathan described. She could almost see herself there, working in that garden, tending to those horses. The image was so vivid and so appealing it made her chest ache. I hope you get it. You deserve that. So do you, Nathan said. You deserve a life where you are safe and valued, where you can speak freely without fear, where you can be yourself without someone trying to break you into submission. They sat in companionable silence for a while, and then Nathan suggested they get some sleep since they would be riding hard again tomorrow. Olivia settled into her bedroll on one side of the fire, while Nathan took the other side. Despite her exhaustion, she lay awake for a long time, staring up at the stars and thinking about Nathan's words. She did deserve better. It felt revolutionary to even think such a thing, let alone believe it. They set out again at first light, eating a cold breakfast in the saddle to save time. The landscape changed as they traveled south, becoming more arid with fewer trees and more rock. Nathan navigated by landmarks Olivia could not identify, but he seemed confident of the route. They passed occasional homesteads, small clusters of buildings in the vast emptiness, but Nathan avoided them, keeping well clear to minimize the chance of being seen and remembered. By late afternoon of the second day, they reached Sarah Bennett's homestead. It was a modest place, a small adobe house with a barn and a few outbuildings, surrounded by a split rail fence. Chickens scratched in the yard, and a vegetable garden showed signs of recent harvest. As they rode up, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun. Sarah Bennett was probably in her mid-40s, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that showed the weathering of hard years. But her eyes were kind, and when she smiled, her whole face softened. Nathan Cordell, I see you made good time, and this must be Olivia. She came forward and helped Olivia down from the saddle with surprising gentleness. You look like you have been through hell, honey, but you are safe now. Come inside. Nathan, you see to the horses and then come in for supper. I expect you will want to head back before dark. Inside, the house was simple, but immaculately clean. Sarah directed Olivia to a rocking chair near the fireplace and pressed a cup of water into her hands. Nathan told me some of your story, Sarah said, settling into a chair across from her. You are not the first woman to come through here running from a bad situation, and you will not be the last. I can give you shelter, and I can give you work if you want it. I run a small sewing and mending business, taking in work from Fort Sumner and the surrounding ranches. If you can sew, I can use the help. If you cannot, I can teach you. I can sew, Olivia said, her voice still quiet but steady. Not expertly, but I know the basics. Good enough. You will stay here as long as you need. When you are ready, I have contacts who can help you get farther away if that is what you want. California, maybe, or Colorado. There are opportunities for women willing to work, and places where no one will know your history or ask too many questions. The kindness in Sarah's voice made Olivia want to cry, but she held the tears back. She had cried enough. Instead, she said, "Thank you. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You repay me by surviving," Sarah said simply. "By rebuilding your life. That is payment enough." Nathan came in then, ducking his head to clear the low doorway. Sarah immediately moved to prepare supper, and Nathan sat down near Olivia. I need to head back soon, he said quietly. If I am not at the ranch by tomorrow afternoon, people will start to wonder where I am. But you are in good hands here. Sarah is one of the toughest women I know. I heard that, Sarah called from the kitchen, laughter in her voice. Olivia managed a small smile, but her chest felt tight. Nathan was leaving, and even though she knew it was necessary, even though she understood he could not stay without raising suspicion, the thought of him riding away left her feeling bereft. In just 2 days, he had become her anchor, the steady presence that made her believe escape was possible. I will come back, Nathan said, as though reading her thoughts. Give it a few weeks for things to settle down. Then I will come back to check on you, I promise. What if Gerald suspects you? What if he fires you or worse? Then I will deal with it. Nathan reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. You are worth whatever consequences come, Olivia. Remember that. They sat there hand in hand until Sarah called them to supper. The meal was simple but delicious, and Sarah kept up a steady stream of conversation that required little response from Olivia. When it was time for Nathan to leave, Olivia walked out with him to where his horse waited, saddled and ready. Be safe, she said, and then gathering her courage, she stood on her toes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. Thank you for giving me my life back. Nathan's hand came up to cup the side of her face, his touch feather light. You gave it back yourself, he said. I just helped with the door. He swung into the saddle and sat looking down at her for a long moment. I will see you soon, Olivia Walsh. Soon, she echoed, and watched him ride away into the gathering darkness. When she finally turned back to the house, Sarah was standing in the doorway, a knowing smile on her face. That is a good man, Sarah said. They are rare, but they exist. I know, Olivia said softly. I am starting to believe I might deserve one. Oh, honey, Sarah said, pulling her into a quick hug. You absolutely do. The weeks that followed were a revelation for Olivia. Living with Sarah was nothing like living with Gerald, or even like her life before, when she had been the sheltered daughter of a respectable Philadelphia family. Sarah expected her to work and work hard, but the work was satisfying. They spent their days sewing, mending torn shirts and pants for the local ranchers, creating simple dresses for the women of Fort Sumner, and even doing some embroidery work for those who could afford such luxuries. Sarah was an excellent teacher, patient but exacting, and Olivia's skills improved rapidly. But more than the work, it was the environment that healed Olivia. Sarah treated her as an equal, asking her opinions, listening when she spoke, and respecting her silences when she needed them. There were 2 other women staying at the homestead when Olivia arrived, both of them also fleeing bad situations. Maria was a young Mexican woman who had escaped from a brutal husband in Santa Fe, and Ellen was an older widow whose stepson had been trying to force her out of the home she had built with her late husband. The 4 women formed a quiet community, supporting each other without prying into painful histories. Slowly, day by day, Olivia felt herself coming back to life. Her voice grew stronger, more confident. She found herself laughing at Sarah's dry humor, joining in conversations without the paralyzing fear that had gripped her for so long. The bruises faded, her ribs healed, and gradually she began to believe that she might actually be free. News filtered in from Fort Sumner through Sarah's customers and supply runs. Gerald had returned from Las Vegas to find his wife gone, and according to reports, his rage had been spectacular. He had questioned the ranch hands brutally, particularly Nathan, but no one could tell him anything because no one knew anything. Nathan stuck to his story about checking line shacks on the far western boundary, and no one could prove otherwise. Gerald apparently threatened to fire him, but practical considerations won out. Nathan was too good a foreman to lose easily, and the ranch work still needed to be done. So Gerald had ranted and raged and then hired a Pinkerton detective to track Olivia down. That news had sent a chill through the household, but Sarah remained calm. Pinkertons are expensive, she said. Gerald will pay for maybe a week or 2 of investigation, but when the trail goes cold, he will cut his losses. Men like him have too much pride to chase after a woman who clearly does not want them. He will find another bride or just make do. She was right. After 10 days, word came that the Pinkerton had given up, reporting that Olivia had either died in the desert or made it to California, and either way was beyond finding. Gerald had apparently accepted this with ill grace and moved on to other concerns. Nathan arrived on a Saturday afternoon in early November, riding up to Sarah's homestead with his easy grace. Olivia was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the hoofbeats, and she looked up to see him dismounting. Her heart did something complicated in her chest, a combination of joy and nervousness and something warmer she was not quite ready to name. "Hello, Olivia," Nathan said, and his smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Hello, Nathan," she replied, and her voice was strong and clear and entirely her own. They stood there grinning at each other like fools until Sarah came out of the house and shooed them both inside for coffee. Nathan brought news from the Diamond M. Gerald was drinking more and growing meaner, but the ranch operation continued. None of the hands had been seriously hurt, though Gerald's temper was making everyone jumpy. Nathan himself was starting to make plans to leave in the spring. "I have been saving for 5 years," he told Olivia and Sarah as they sat around the kitchen table. "I have almost enough to put a down payment on a piece of land I have been watching, about 20 miles west of here. Good grass, water from a spring-fed creek, not too much scrub. The owner is willing to sell cheap because he wants to move to California. Come spring, I am going to give Gerald my notice and make an offer." "That is wonderful," Olivia said, meaning it. The thought of Nathan having his dream made her genuinely happy. Nathan's gray eyes found hers across the table. "I would like you to see it before I buy. Make sure it meets with your approval." The implication hung in the air. Olivia felt her breath catch. "Nathan, I know it is too soon," Nathan said quickly. "I know you need time to heal, to figure out who you are outside of the fear you have been living with. I am not asking for anything now, Olivia. I just want you to know that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I would be honored to build that life with you." Sarah cleared her throat delicately. "I think I need to go check on the chickens. Suddenly, right now." She disappeared out the back door, leaving them alone. Olivia stared at her hands, emotions warring inside her. She cared for Nathan, probably more than cared, but the thought of marriage, of belonging to another man, even a good man, made her stomach clench with residual fear. "I am still married to Gerald," she said quietly. "Legally, I am still his wife." "Marriages can be ended," Nathan said. "I have been talking to a lawyer in Fort Sumner. If you can prove cruelty and abandonment of your welfare, you might be able to get a divorce. It would take time and money, but it is possible." He reached across the table and took her hand gently. "I am not trying to rush you or pressure you. I just want you to know that there are options, that you do not have to be tied to Gerald Mitchum forever." Olivia looked at their joined hands, his broad and work-roughened, hers smaller and bearing the needle marks from her sewing work. "Why me?" she asked, the question she had been afraid to voice. "You could have any woman you wanted, Nathan. Why me, with all my damage and fear?" "Because you are brave," Nathan said simply. "Because you survived things that would have broken a lesser person, and you are still here, still fighting to rebuild yourself. Because when you smile, which you are doing more often now, it lights up your whole face. Because you are kind and thoughtful, and you see people clearly." He paused. "And because from the moment I met you, something in me recognized something in you, like calling to like." Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid to trust this, to believe it could be real." "That is all right," Nathan said. "Fear is not weakness, Olivia. It is just information. You feel fear, and then you decide what to do despite the fear. That is courage. I need time, Olivia said. I need to figure out who I am on my own before I can be part of something with someone else. I know, take all the time you need. I will be here when you are ready. Nathan stayed for dinner and the evening, and when he left to ride back to the Diamond M, Olivia walked him out to his horse. The November air was cool, carrying a hint of the winter to come, and above them the stars blazed in their familiar patterns. Thank you for being patient with me, Olivia said. Nathan settled into his saddle and looked down at her, his face soft in the moonlight. You are worth waiting for, Olivia, however long it takes. He touched the brim of his hat in a casual salute and rode off into the night. Olivia stood watching until he disappeared into the darkness, then turned back to the house where warm light spilled from the windows and Sarah waited with understanding eyes. The winter passed with surprising speed. Nathan visited every few weeks, carefully timing his trips to Fort Sumner on ranch business so that he could swing by Sarah's homestead without raising suspicion. Each visit, Olivia found herself more at ease with him, more willing to open up about her past and her fears. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they harbored. Nathan never pushed for more than she was willing to give, content to let their relationship develop at her pace. Sarah watched these visits with approval and occasionally offered Olivia advice drawn from her own hard-won wisdom. Sarah had been widowed young, her husband killed in the war, and she had built her life alone with determination and grit. The right man does not try to own you, she told Olivia one evening as they worked on a particularly intricate embroidery commission. He walks beside you, not ahead of you or behind you, and he sure as hell does not try to make himself bigger by making you smaller. Nathan is not like that, Olivia said, and realized as she said it how much she had come to trust this truth. No, he is not, Sarah agreed. So the question becomes, what do you want, Olivia? Not what you think you should want, not what would be safe or expected, but what do you actually want? It was a question Olivia had been avoiding, but she forced herself to consider it seriously. What did she want? She wanted to feel safe, yes, but she also wanted more than just safety. She wanted partnership. She wanted someone who saw her as an equal. She wanted love that felt like freedom rather than imprisonment. And when she was honest with herself, she wanted Nathan. Not because he had rescued her, though he had done that. Not because she felt obligated, because she did not. But because he made her laugh, and he listened when she talked, and he looked at her like she was precious. I want Nathan, she admitted quietly. But I am terrified of wanting him. Of course you are, Sarah said pragmatically. You have excellent reasons to be afraid. But you cannot let fear make all of your decisions, honey. Sometimes you have to take a leap and trust that you will land somewhere good. In late February, Sarah helped Olivia contact the lawyer Nathan had mentioned. The process of filing for divorce was complicated and expensive, but Sarah loaned her the money without hesitation, and the lawyer seemed genuinely sympathetic to her situation. He warned her that it could take months or even years, depending on whether Gerald contested it, but Olivia was willing to wait. The important thing was that she had started the process. She was taking active steps to reclaim her life. March arrived with warming temperatures and the first wildflowers blooming across the desert. Nathan came by on a Saturday afternoon, and this time he was practically vibrating with excitement. The land he had been watching was officially for sale, and he had made his offer. The owner had accepted, and if everything went through, Nathan would take possession in April. Come see it, he urged Olivia. Please. I want to show you what it could be. Olivia looked at Sarah, who made a shooing motion. Go on. Maria and Ellen can help me with the sewing. You have been cooped up here all winter. Some time out in the sunshine will do you good. So, Olivia saddled Bess, who had become her regular mount over the past months, and rode out with Nathan toward the west. They traveled for about 2 hours through beautiful high desert country before Nathan guided them off the main trail and up a gradual rise. At the top, he stopped and gestured broadly. There, he said simply. Olivia looked out over the vista before her and felt her breath catch. The valley below was perhaps a mile across, rimmed by low, rocky hills covered in pinon and juniper. Through the center ran a creek lined with cottonwoods, their branches just beginning to show the green of spring growth. Grass already showed in patches where the winter snow had melted, and she could see where more would grow as the season progressed. In the distance, mountains rose purple and majestic. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "I thought we could build a house there," Nathan said, pointing to a rise near the creek, high enough to avoid flooding, but close enough for easy water access. The barn could go there, and we would have the whole southern slope for pasture. There is a natural corral area in those rocks to the east, and over there, with southern exposure and good drainage, that would be perfect for a garden. Olivia noticed his use of we and felt warmth spread through her chest. She could see it all, the life he was describing. More than that, she could see herself in that life, not as an accessory or possession, but as an essential part of it. "I filed for divorce," she told him. Nathan turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified, relieved, hopeful, all of it at once." She took a breath. "The lawyer said it could take a year or more. Gerald might contest it, try to make it difficult, but I started the process. I am ending my marriage to him legally, not just by running away." "That is good," Nathan said. "That is really good, Olivia." They sat on their horses looking out over the valley, and Olivia felt something settle inside her, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. "When the divorce is final," she said slowly, "if you still want me, I would like to marry you. Not because I need rescuing or because I owe you, but because I choose you. Because I want to build this life with you." Nathan's face transformed with joy. He swung down from his horse and reached up to help her down from hers, and when her feet touched the ground, he pulled her carefully into his arms. "I will still want you," he said against her hair. "I will want you a year from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now. I love you, Olivia. I think I have loved you since the first time I saw you struggling with that trunk, too stubborn to ask for help. I love you too," Olivia said, and felt the truth of it resonate through her entire being. This was what love was supposed to feel like, safe and exciting all at once. A partnership built on respect and mutual care. "I cannot promise I will not still have bad days, that the fear will not sometimes come back. I know, we will handle it together." Nathan pulled back enough to look at her face. "Can I kiss you?" That he asked permission, that he waited for her consent, made Olivia love him even more. "Yes," she said, and rose up to meet him halfway. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like idiots. Nathan took her hand and walked her around the property, pointing out various features and outlining his plans. Olivia added her own ideas, surprised at how easily they flowed now that she was allowing herself to dream again. They could plant apple trees near the house. They could raise a few chickens for eggs. Maybe keep a milk cow. She could continue her sewing work, taking in commissions from the surrounding ranches. Nathan could focus on breeding those good ranch horses he loved. It would be a modest life, but it would be theirs, built by their own hands and sustained by their own labor. When they finally rode back to Sarah's homestead as the sun set behind them, Olivia felt different, lighter, more herself than she had been in years. Sarah took one look at their faces and started laughing. "Well, it is about time," she said. "I was starting to think you two would dance around each other forever." Nathan gave his notice to Gerald in early April and moved off the Diamond M without ceremony. Gerald apparently accepted it with his usual ill temper, but made no real effort to keep him. Nathan moved into Fort Sumner temporarily, taking a room above the general store and working odd jobs while he waited for the final paperwork on his land purchase to go through. The divorce proceedings moved with agonizing slowness, but Olivia was not idle. She continued her sewing work with Sarah, saved every penny she could, and gradually built a small nest egg of her own. Nathan visited regularly, and they spent their time together planning every detail of their future ranch. The legal separation from Gerald felt less real than the emotional separation she had already achieved. He was part of her past, a chapter that had closed, and she refused to give him any more power over her present or future. In July, a full 9 months after Olivia had fled the Diamond M, word came that Gerald had been killed. Apparently, he had gotten drunk and violent with one of the ranch hands, a young man who had finally had enough. The hand had shot him in self-defense, and the law had ruled it justifiable. The news reached Olivia through Sarah's connections in town, and her reaction surprised her. She felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, not even vindication. Gerald was simply gone, removed from the world, and she could close that door completely. With Gerald's death, the divorce became unnecessary, making Olivia a widow in the eyes of the law. It should have felt wrong to claim that status when she had never mourned him as a wife should mourn a husband, but the lawyer assured her it was the simplest path forward. She signed the necessary papers and accepted the legal fiction that she had been a proper grieving widow. Nathan's land purchase finalized in August, and he immediately began building. He hired a few men from town to help with the heavy construction work, but he did much of it himself, and Olivia found excuses to ride out and help when she could. She was not much use with the actual construction, but she could bring meals, organize supplies, and offer encouragement. Watching the house take shape was deeply satisfying, each board and nail representing the life they were building together. In September, exactly 1 year after Olivia had first arrived in Fort Sumner as Gerald Mitchum's terrified bride, she married Nathan Cordell in a simple ceremony at Sarah Bennett's homestead. Sarah stood up as witness, along with Doc Harrison, who had been the first to truly see Olivia's injuries and speak plainly about her choices. There was no fancy dress, no elaborate celebration, just a commitment made between two people who had found each other in the midst of darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. The house was not quite finished, but it was livable, and Nathan carried Olivia across the threshold with pride and joy written across his face. That first night in their own home, lying in Nathan's arms in the bed they had built together, Olivia felt a peace she had never expected to know. This was what love was supposed to be: partnership, respect, tenderness, the freedom to be herself without fear. "Are you happy?" Nathan asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "I am happy," Olivia said, and meant it with her whole heart. "I am home." The years that followed were not always easy because life rarely is. The ranch demanded constant work, and there were seasons of drought and seasons when cattle prices plummeted and they had to tighten their belts and hope for better times ahead. But through it all, Nathan and Olivia faced each challenge as partners. They learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, learned how to fight fairly when they disagreed, learned how to comfort each other when fear or doubt crept in. Olivia continued to battle occasional echoes of her trauma. Sometimes a sharp sound or an unexpected movement would send her heart racing and her body into defensive mode. Sometimes she would wake from nightmares about Marcus or Gerald, gasping and disoriented. But Nathan was always there, patient and steady, reminding her where she was and that she was safe. And gradually, those episodes became less frequent, less intense, until they were rare enough that she could go weeks without thinking about her past. Her voice, which had been silenced for so long, grew stronger every year. She spoke her mind freely in their home, offering opinions and making decisions alongside Nathan. When they went into Fort Sumner for supplies, she chatted easily with shopkeepers and other ranchers' wives. She even joined a women's sewing circle, though she was careful not to share too many details about her past. Some things were private, meant only for those closest to her. In the spring of 1880, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with complicated emotions: joy at the thought of creating a family with Nathan, but also fear rooted in her understanding of how vulnerable pregnancy and motherhood made a woman. Nathan sensed her fear immediately and spent hours talking through her concerns, reassuring her that he would be there every step of the way, that he would never use her pregnancy as a means of control or manipulation. "This is our child," he said, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Not mine, not yours, but ours. And whatever comes, we will face it together." Their son was born in December of 1880, a healthy boy they named Samuel after Nathan's father. The labor was long and difficult, but Doc Harrison attended, and Sarah came to help. And when Olivia finally held her son in her arms, she wept with a joy so profound it felt almost painful. This child had been created in love, would be raised in love, would never know the fear that had defined so much of her own life. Nathan proved to be a natural father, patient and tender with Samuel from the very beginning. He sang to the baby in a surprisingly good baritone, walked him through the house when he was fussy, and changed diapers without complaint. Watching him with their son made Olivia fall in love with him all over again, deeper and more completely than she had thought possible. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Nathan's instincts about horse breeding proved sound, and his well-trained mounts developed a reputation throughout the territory. Ranchers came from as far as Socorro and Albuquerque to purchase his horses, and the modest income allowed them to make improvements to the property. They added on to the house, giving Samuel his own small room and creating a proper parlor where Olivia could receive her sewing clients. They built a larger barn and brought in better breeding stock. They planted an orchard of apple and pear trees that would bear fruit in a few years. Sarah remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting often and claiming grandmotherly rights to Samuel despite no blood relation. She had continued her work helping women escape bad situations, and Olivia sometimes assisted, offering her own story as proof that it was possible to survive and even thrive after trauma. It felt good to take her pain and transform it into something useful, to help other women find their voices the way she had found hers. In 1883, Olivia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. This labor was easier than Samuel's had been, and Olivia recovered quickly. Rose was a sunny, determined baby who seemed to fear nothing, and Nathan joked that she had inherited her mother's hidden courage. Watching her children grow, Olivia marveled at how different their lives would be from hers. They would grow up knowing they were loved unconditionally. They would see their parents treat each other with respect and kindness. They would learn that strength did not come from domination, but from integrity and compassion. The summer of 1885 brought the ranch's greatest challenge yet. A drought gripped New Mexico, and the creek that had always run reliably began to slow to a trickle. Feed grew scarce, and Nathan had to make the difficult decision to sell off some of their cattle at a loss to avoid losing them all. It was a stressful time, with money tight and the future uncertain. But Olivia and Nathan faced it together, cutting expenses where they could, finding creative solutions to problems, and supporting each other through the worry. One night, after they had put the children to bed and sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the dry hills in shades of gold and crimson, Nathan said, "I am sorry. I promised you security, and here we are struggling to make ends meet." "You promised me partnership," Olivia corrected gently. "And that is exactly what I have. We will get through this, Nathan. We have survived worse." "Have we?" Nathan asked, then immediately looked stricken. "I did not mean—" "I know what you meant," Olivia said. She reached for his hand and laced their fingers together. "And you are right. This is hard. But hard is not the same as hopeless. We have each other. We have our children. We have this land. The drought will break eventually. Until it does, we keep doing what we have always done. We take it one day at a time, and we do not give up." The drought finally broke in early October, with a series of storms that filled the creek and soaked the parched earth. By the following spring, grass grew thick again, and the ranch began to recover. Nathan bought back some of the cattle he had sold, and his horse breeding business picked up as the regional economy improved. By 1886, they were more than solvent. They were thriving. On a warm evening in September of that year, Olivia stood in her garden picking tomatoes and watching Samuel, now 5, trying to teach Rose, who was 3, how to properly gather eggs from the henhouse. Rose, as usual, had her own ideas about the proper method and was arguing with her brother with impressive determination. Nathan was in the corral working with a young horse, his movements patient and sure. Olivia paused in her work and looked around at everything they had built. The house, solid and welcoming, with flower boxes beneath the windows, and a swing Nathan had built hanging from the porch beam. The barn, its doors standing open to reveal their small herd of horses. The orchard, where the first apples were beginning to ripen. The garden, thriving under her care. Her children, healthy and happy and secure. Her husband, the man who had waited for her to find her voice again, and then spent every day since proving that her trust in him was justified. 8 years ago, she had arrived in Fort Sumner broken and silent, certain her life was over in any way that mattered. She had been so afraid, so convinced that she would never be more than a victim of her circumstances. But she had been wrong. With patience, with courage, with support from people who saw her value, even when she could not see it herself, she had reclaimed her voice and her life. She had learned that love did not have to hurt, that strength came in many forms, and that the past did not have to define the future. Nathan looked up from his work and caught her watching him. His face broke into that smile she loved, the one that crinkled his eyes and made her heart skip. He said something to the horse, gave it a pat on the neck, and walked over to where she stood in the garden. He slid his arms around her waist from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Olivia said. "How far we have come. How lucky I am." "How lucky we are," Nathan corrected. He turned her in his arms so he could see her face. "You know what tomorrow is?" Olivia thought for a moment. "The 8th anniversary of the day I arrived in Fort Sumner, and 7 years since we got married, and every single day since then has been a gift." He kissed her softly. "Thank you for choosing me, Olivia. Thank you for trusting me enough to build this life together." "Thank you for waiting," Olivia said. "Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself." They stood there in the garden as the sun sank lower, their children's voices rising in laughter from the henhouse, the horses nickering softly in the corral, and the evening breeze carrying the scent of ripening fruit and fresh earth. It was a simple moment, nothing dramatic or extraordinary, but it was perfect. It was home. It was everything Olivia had never dared to dream she could have. That night, after the children were asleep and she and Nathan lay together in their bed, Olivia thought about the girl she had been when she stepped off that stagecoach 8 years ago. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that the fear would not last forever, that there was a good man waiting who would help her find her voice again. But maybe that girl would not have believed her. Maybe she had needed to walk through the darkness to fully appreciate the light. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Nathan murmured back, already half asleep. "Always will." Olivia smiled and closed her eyes, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, and she would face them all with the voice she had reclaimed and the partner who walked beside her. Her story, which had begun in silence and fear, had become one of courage and love, and the best part was that it was far from over. There were years ahead, full of possibility and promise, and she would meet them without fear. The mail-order bride had found her voice, and in finding it, she had found everything else that mattered: home, family, love, and the unshakable knowledge that she was enough, exactly as she was. The cowboy had waited, patient and steady, and together they had built something beautiful from the ashes of her past. It was not the ending she had expected when she boarded that stagecoach in Philadelphia all those years ago. It was so much better.